This is EF Outbound, a podcast that showcases transformative travel stories that defy our expectations, challenge our assumptions, and teach us something new about the world and ourselves. Outbound covers all sorts of transformational travel stories, from gallivants on mountainsides to proposals on planes and voodoo saints in the Dominican. But not all revelations have to come from an adventure. In fact, some of the biggest transformations can come from what some may consider a standard college experience: study abroad.
I'd really started to learn how to love myself in Spain. When you're constantly not trying to prove yourself to other people, you have literal physical, emotional, mental space to care about yourself and to look out for yourself in an individualistic way. What does Genesis need in this moment?
I'm Meg Martineau, and today on EF Outbound, we're going to follow Genesis on a journey of self-discovery, through school to college and then to Spain. An experience that changed her so much, it actually altered her future. But for Genesis, study abroad wasn't something she had always dreamed of. In fact, she had much more practical ideas.
I wanted to be a pediatrician when I was a kid. But if you ask me why I wanted to be a pediatrician when I was a kid, I remember writing this in kindergarten. I said, because they make a lot of money. I don't care about money, but I know we needed it. I actually didn't really like school growing up, which is really funny. If you would have asked my 5-year-old self why I didn't like school, I'd just say I didn't like waking up in the morning. I was not a morning person. I used to look at my teddy bears and be like, you're so lucky. You don't have to wake up in the morning. Why do I have to go and you don't? But despite not liking school, I was always just good at it. And I think it was because I was disciplined. And that discipline was really fueled by an appreciation for my parents. I'm the daughter of Guatemalan immigrants, very proud of that, and that has entirely affected my experience. It's through their sacrifices that I even had an education. And so for me, the only way that I could repay my parents was to honor them through doing well at school.
At a very young age, Genesis decided school held way more than just an educational value and started working extremely hard. Not for her, but for her parents.
I remember moving to Florida for 2 years and, being recognized to be part of the quote unquote gifted program, which shifted my entire educational process because then my mom put in work to maintain me in the gifted program.
But academics wasn't the only thing she had to contend with. Since she was young, Genesis knew she wasn't like most of her peers.
I knew that I wasn't white, and I couldn't really describe that as a kid, but I just knew that my parents speak Spanish, I speak Spanish, we eat tortillas and frijoles at home. That's different than what a lot of other kids, eat.
Genesis never let that get in the way, and those gifted programs made way to private schools, where she continued to push herself despite not fitting in.
I was the only Latina in my grade. I remember, for example, talking on the phone with my dad in Spanish, outside of school. And then people being all of a sudden, almost practically eavesdropping on my conversation, even though they didn't understand it, but it was just sort of she's different and what is she talking about? Or this othering. This is just experience, even if it's not intentional, just experience of you are different, you are not like us, and here is why.
And from there, she did something no one in her family had done.
I was the first one in my family to go to college, and on top of that, I was the first one to leave state. And even though Boston is only an hour away from Providence, it was still a really big deal for my family to have me go away. And it was also a really big step in my personal growth because I've always been really independent growing up. My mom tells me that apparently one day I just came up to her and was like, Mom, I learned how to tie my shoes. And it's because ever since I was little, I just did learn how to do things on my own. And going to college out of state was sort of an extension of that. I was on heavy financial aid throughout college. I had at least, one or two jobs at any given point. But whatever I did have to pay for my tuition was paid by me. I've also done a lot of, throughout college, helping out my family financially. And I've always been someone that my family, my brothers, my mom, my dad can rely on.
College Genesis, as she refers to herself at this time, was on a path to her future.
The plan I had established for myself was graduate, get my master's in high school history to teach high school history, move my little self to Boston, and settle down. And that was what I had planned for myself.
To Genesis, this is what her future held. More school and more work, but in the end, it would all be worth it for the stability. Her life was all about giving back, to her parents, to the community, but not so much to herself. And then something came her way that was so far off her radar, she had never even thought about it.
Junior year came along, everyone studies abroad, junior year. That was not even within the realm of thought for me or my family. My goals as a kid was not like, oh, I'm gonna go travel the world. I mean, if going to Boston was a huge deal, like the thought of going anywhere else in the world that wasn't Guatemala to visit family, was not really within the realm of thought. And so it just was like, okay, I guess this is a thing I could consider doing.
Genesis found a program in Spain she was interested in, and a scholarship that would make it financially possible. She applied to them simultaneously and then heard back. She got into the program and got the scholarship. But in the time it took for Genesis to wrap her head around the fact that she was actually going abroad, it was taken away from her.
Upon receiving that scholarship, Tufts emailed me and was pretty much like, we know that you got the scholarship, so now we're going to reduce your financial aid, and that scholarship is just going to go to your tuition. And I'm like, I wouldn't have applied for this scholarship if I knew that's what was going to happen. I was really worried because obviously, even though I worked at school, all that went to my phone bill, helping out my family. So I really didn't have money saved up to go to this trip, and I was depending on the scholarship. It sucked, for sure, because I'd worked so hard to get the scholarship. I don't know, I was finally getting excited. I got accepted to study abroad, and I was excited about it. When it came to money, I've dealt my entire life with just not having enough. So it was yes, it sucked, but it was also kind of well, this is just another one of those things that I can't have. But this for me was just unfair. I was like, no. I worked hard this is my money. You can't take that away from me.
But Genesis wasn't about to give up. She had worked so hard for so long and finally found something she wanted to do for herself. And so once again, she found herself doing something no one in her family had done.
That's when I decided to do a GoFundMe. And that was a lot harder of a decision than I think most people would assume. In my family, asking for money is not something you do. You don't ask people for money. Even if you're hungry, even if you can't afford something, you figure it out. My mom is the most sort of careful with that. She's the one who's most wary of people knowing that I'm in need. So when I did it, I was worried that she would be really upset about it and be like, you need to take that down. I don't need anyone knowing that, you don't have enough money to go abroad. But my mom was not on Facebook at the time. So I did it anyway because it was kind of like, all right, well, I deserve to go abroad and I can at least give this a shot.
I hope this amazing person has an amazing experience.
Never met you, heard great things. Good luck.
Spain will be lucky to have someone as compassionate as you.
You were on the same bus as me, and the atmosphere around you is amazing. Good luck.
The work you do is incredibly inspiring. Have an amazing time abroad. Me tienes que prometer que vas a comer churros y chocolates cada día.
I was very, very surprised. Hello, everyone. I just really do want to say thank you. It's weird, I'm kind of incapable of taking a compliment, so this is the world's biggest compliment, just sort of put in my lap. It really allowed me to reflect on myself. All of us as people, we're so hard on ourselves all the time. We think we have nothing to offer. We think people don't notice the light that's inside us or whatever. And then to have all these people, both close friends and people who barely knew me, to say such positive things about me and support another step in my life was just like, wow, I guess I do have something special about me that people notice. Thanks, and I guess I'll see you guys later. I knew it was going to be cool because I was like, oh, Europe, I'd never been to Europe, Spain, it'll be interesting to go to. I was just like, it's going to be a great semester of me doing something different. And then that was kind of the extent of it. So when I got to Spain, I was like, this is cool. This is really nice. The weather's nice. People are, really social, which I like because I'm a social person. The food's pretty good. And then after I'd say 2 weeks, I noticed I was really liking it and was like, but why? It was uncomfortable how much I liked being in this new place I had never been to before. And then after much thinking about it, I realized, at least the conclusion I came to, was that my identity as a Latina is more permanent in the United States. I'm more easily pegged as Latina, and thus those interactions are influenced by the identity that's ascribed to me. In Spain, I more easily passed as a Spaniard. Oftentimes, I was confused for a Spaniard. When I speak Spanish, they're like, oh, you're not from here. I would tell them that I'm American, daughter of Guatemalan immigrants. But that didn't really change much. I just felt like people were seeing me as Genesis before they were seeing me as Genesis la Latina, or Genesis, the daughter of Guatemalan immigrants, Genesis, the girl who comes from a low-income background. It's so hard to put into words what that feels like. But having come from a place where I never experienced that to an entirely new context where that was what the norm was, where people were just like, oh yeah, you're Genesis. It was totally surprising. It was just an entirely new experience.
This new experience was so foreign to her, she had to give it a name. She called it
Spanish Genesis.
But this wasn't the only new experience Genesis would have. She was in for another big change.
Spanish Genesis has totally adopted a lot of Spanish customs, mainly the no pasa nada attitude, as I like to call it. In Spain, more so than, or at least in Madrid, more so than in the United States, there is people a lot more easygoing about just life and day-to-day things. They value people. They value human existence in a way that I have not seen in the United States. In the workplace, for example, I love to see my teachers just chilling, having a coffee, they take their time. Even teachers take their time to relax because we're humans and we need a break. We can't be working 100% of the time, at 100% effort. There's literally a word in Spain that's called sobremesa. And what that means is you'll be at a restaurant for dinner and you'll start to have a conversation. Then you're finished eating and you will be at that, even though the waiter has cleared your table, you'll be at that table for another hour or 2 hours just talking. Sobremesa. It's like you're done eating, but you're still at the table, enjoying each other's presence and just chatting.
Genesis had never been able to slow down. She worked hard to pay back her parents through education and then literally pay them back by helping out financially. She worked hard to stay in gifted programs, get into private schools, and go to college. She worked hard to get a scholarship to go to Spain. She was working hard to achieve her goal of becoming a history teacher. Having a minute to stop and enjoy life was not something Genesis did, or even thought to do. Working hard was life. And so, for the first time, Genesis was able to stop and take a breath.
I'd really started to learn how to love myself in Spain. When you're constantly not trying to prove yourself to other people, whether that be because your university is so exigente, what is that, demanding of you, or because people aren't assuming things about me because of my race or my class, right? You have literal, physical, emotional, mental space to care about yourself and to look out for yourself in an individualistic way. What does Genesis need? Not just what do Latinos need? What does Genesis need in this moment? When you grow up in the United States, and especially when you go to a private institution like Tufts, which is very rigorous, it's very hard, okay? it's impossible not to internalize measuring your self-worth by what you produce, measuring who you are. Like, you know how many times people are like, oh my God, I'm going to fail that test and then my life is going to be over. It's like, actually, no, your life will continue and you're going to be okay. That one grade in anthropology in sophomore year is not going to really affect the rest of your life, I promise you. But college geneticists didn't know that. College geneticists didn't believe that. And then coming to Spain, I began to sort of unlearn and disconnect this idea of the only way my life can have value is if I, get an A+ on all of my papers, if I graduate summa cum laude, if I'm making X amount of dollars by the time I graduate college.
After 4 short months, her study abroad program was over, and Spanish Genesis had to return back to the United States and back to college Genesis.
Coming back my senior year, I mean, it is so easy to get back into the groove of routine of like every hour you need to be doing something. I was writing a thesis, and my thesis was both a 75-page research paper and a documentary. So a lot of work, and I was working 2 jobs, right? So there was a lot on my plate. I totally would just be like, oh man, I just wish I was in Spain right now. Or I just had some nostalgia of like, remember when things were so easy in Spain and when you could like just walk around the streets of Madrid and go shopping or have a coffee. With the whole self-love piece and loving myself, I noticed that slipping a little bit. The fact that I noticed it, I think, is significant. Because even though I was losing it, the fact that I was noticing that I was losing it meant that I had once felt what it was like to love myself and the desire to want it back.
And then Genesis had a realization. The no pasa nada attitude could coexist with college Genesis. She could be both versions of herself, and she could still be successful.
Not only when you travel, but in addition to traveling when you live abroad, you're able to pick the good things of where you're from and then pick the good things of where you are and learn of all the different ways that people live. How do other people enjoy their lives? Why do they enjoy it in that way? What purpose do those things serve for them? Like, for example, the ambition that a lot of Americans have, the drive, the willpower to like work really hard is good. That's good. And I have a lot of that. But the overdoing it, that is all that you do, and the expression of you live to work, not work to live, I don't agree with that. I don't think that's not, at least for me, that's not the most important thing in my life. So it just made me realize, all right, like there are totally times where I was like, you know what, forget this. I'm not working on this thesis right now. It's not working. I'm going to take a nap. Those are acts of self-love, acknowledging when your body needs rest. I remember all throughout college putting 110% into all of my classes, even though that's physically impossible. And then finally, senior year, I was just kind of like, you know what? This class is getting 10% of my effort right now. This class is going to get 50 because I have an essay to write, and just being okay with that. Being like, this is what, in this week, this is the amount of energy I have. There you go, Professor so-and-so. I hope you like it. And if you don't, well, that's what I had. That's what I have for you. So those little pieces, I felt like I was so grateful for that my senior year. I was like, thank goodness, or thank the universe that I went abroad and learned these sort of self-care tools, if you will, because this is what's helping me survive my senior year of college, which was so incredibly stressful.
And when Genesis was finally able to let go of this notion that her self-worth was tied to her performance, she realized that there were other paths for her future.
I was presented with the opportunity to teach English in Spain for a year. And I remember really kind of being really hesitant to do that, mainly because so much of my work in education is about fighting like systems of oppression and using education as a social justice tool. So I was kind of questioning my own, I'm like, Genesis, why do you want to go to Spain to teach English? Like, is that really in line with like what your values are? But after talking to a mentor of mine, she's like, Genesis, yeah, you might be going to Spain to teach English, but your social justice passion or drive is going to shine no matter where you go.
She thought back to that dream of being a history teacher, of being stable and helping out her parents. And she decided that dream would always be there for her.
I don't know if it's the Gemini in me, but I was just like, I kind of want to throw a wrench in my own plans. I was like, yeah, no, the high school history thing, I'm like almost 100% certain I want to do it. But you know what? Let me just try the Spain thing out. I just want to see what it's like. And then I went, and I'm still here.
When we were not recording, Genesis said something so beautiful to me that I have to share it. She said, so many people think that their life will start when they get to a certain step, like my life begins when I get married, or when I enter the workforce, or when I get a master's. But your life has already started, so you just have to live it. And now Genesis, the girl who never dreamed of travel, has been living in Spain for 1.5 years. She's still working hard, but it's on things she wants to work for. And later this year, she'll be moving on to another country.
I got a Fulbright to be an English language assistant in Portugal. So I will still be in Europe. And then my plan, ideally, is after those 9 months in Portugal, I will come back to Madrid and continue my life here. My mom, in particular, noticed the change in me. When I studied abroad, how much happier I sounded, how much less stressed I was. And it's just like, wow, it looks like Spain's really doing some good for you. And then I came back and I've been able to really, really start to internalize these changes in a more permanent way. And my mom is ecstatic to hear how happy I am. There's something very empowering about knowing that you can exist in an entirely different context. And I've learned more about myself, I'd say, in this 1.5 years that I've been in Spain than I did in 4 years of college. And that also just has to do with the kind of education that I've been putting myself through. This is a life education. This is a personal, social, emotional education beyond just an academic textbook education, which isn't to downplay that. But I no longer feel like the only thing that matters is the next step, or the only thing that matters is what's on my resume.
Is Spanish Genesis now just Genesis?
That's a really great question, and I want to say yes.
EF Outbound is brought to you by EF Education First, the world leader in international education. This episode was hosted and produced by Meg Martineau with help from me, Shelby Elatmani, and Tucker Hamilton. It was sound designed by Billy Weraznik. For more information on the podcast, head over to ef.com/podcast. And if you like what you hear, don't forget to subscribe. If you want to share your own transformative travel story, email us at outbound@ef.com.